You may not know this, but Michael Rood has retracted his claim that any ancient Aramaic texts from the 4th century or earlier said that he was seeing and was claiming previously that it said, it reported in the genealogy of Matthew that it said that Joseph was the father of Miriam, and that would mean she would be the 13th generation, and then Jesus would be the 14th generation when she would give birth. And he thought that was a perfect match. So the Greek text says Joseph is the husband of Mary, not the father of Mary. So he found a text that said he thought he had found a text that said that Joseph was the father of Mary, when all Greek texts, as far as we know, all say Joseph is the husband of Mary. So now he's retracted that, and I'm going to show you the video where that actually happens. But I want to show you what would happen if you researched this. If you're trying to find out what's his view on this, did he retract or not? And I'm going to show you what the search looks like. So I typed in the search, Michael Rood retracts Aramaic text supports Mary is daughter of Joseph, right? That's easy. So let's just see what happens next. So you see this, the chronological gospels of Rood Awakening. And if you go there, you just get more of the same of before. It's the 2013 book where he documented supposedly the evidence for this very claim. No retraction in that book at all. And I'll show you that when we go to that book. So let's keep going. So then the next one, you go down the list, and I'm skipping one. I'm going to show you what that one is last. Mike Rood in his chronological gospel puts forward the idea that the genealogy of Jesus is the one presented, blah, blah, blah. So then if you go to that, you just find out he's just summarizing Michael Rood's evidence that allegedly there are Hebrew manuscripts that he has reviewed showing Mary was the descendant of the direct line of King David. And this person doesn't even summarize that correctly. It's not Hebrew manuscripts, it's Aramaic manuscripts, the Peshitta. So that's not the same thing. Aramaic is not exactly Hebrew. It's another development of Hebrew. And then basically, if you keep researching, you're just going to end up here, where you're at the last page of Google and there's no other hits. But this is the one where I want to show you what happens when you go to it. This was, I think, second or third. It says Joseph, the father of Mary. And as you can see, it says Facebook videos, Matthew 1:16, Nehemiah's wall. Okay, so we next have to watch part of this video, but in order to understand this video and what Mr. Rood is saying, you need to know what he was presenting 41 different times that then Mr. Nehemiah Gordon is going to explain he couldn't agree with what Mr. Rood was saying that entire time about there being an Aramaic text that supported the idea that it was said Joseph, the husband of Mary, in the genealogy. And so that would create a 13th generation. So Mary isn't the husband, Mary is not Joseph is not the husband of Mary, according to the way it normally reads. Joseph is the father of Mary. So now you get a new generation, and then you have Mary is the one whose line counts. So it's like a matrilineal descent, which doesn't work incidentally. We'll get to that in a second. But I just want to show you, and I'm going to provide this to Mr. Rood too, to say, hey, look, I think the Christian community needs to ask him to please retract your book, actually pull it off the shelves, delete it off your website, or remove the pages that have the incorrect information. It's a book since 2013. It has a big mistake in it. Don't leave it alone. Now this retraction here, what's the date of this? Is there a date even on this? Let me see. Well, it seems to be, if you look, the posted a video. So this has to be it. June 3, 2020. So it's now almost 2 years later. Well, let's see. It's November 2022. It's 2.5 years later. And this is not been properly retracted, so that this misinformation is removed clearly, unequivocally off of Mr. It's great on Nehemiah Gordon's channels, what he's doing. He's making it clear. But Mr. Rood, who created this problem, has to retract it with the same way he pronounced it. Do a new book, or do an amendment to the book, or make a clear retraction, maybe even keep the book the way it was, but put a big red sign around and say, this is all retracted. I spoke to Mr. Nehemiah Gordon and I was wrong. I misunderstood what he said. Whatever he's got to say to save face. I'm not here that he's got to humiliate himself. He's just got to fix this, because this is where mistakes start getting into the minds of people and they start thinking this is really real. It's not real at all. So anyway, so it's been 2.5 years and this is all we have. And it's 4 pages of nothing. And this is it. You've got to watch this video. And then it's not even that clear. So now we're going to go back and we're going to watch the video that is being retracted. And then I'm going to show you some of the text in his book. And then we'll play this video. And then you'll have a better context to understand what is being said by Nehemiah Gordon and Mr. Rood in the video. And I want to emphasize, I love Mr. Rood. I love all his stuff. And everybody can make a mistake, okay? I'm not trying to drive a wedge into him or something. I love his ministry. He deserves all the support he gets. But everybody makes a mistake. And when you make a mistake, you've got to retract it the same way you pronounced it, okay? So we're going to stop here and we're going to play his video. Okay, so just for the record, we're going to be looking at this video, A Rude Awakening Presents Raiders of the Lost Book, Discoveries in the Ancient Hebrew Texts of Matthew. So he's talking about ancient. He's not talking about the Shem Tov, which is not ancient. That's medieval, not ancient. Ancient has to be like 1st, 4th century. So this is a totally radical different place that he's looking at, what's going to later be discussed by Mr. Nehemiah Gordon. And this is episode 3. Raiders of the Lost Book, and you can find it at Rude Awakening YouTube channel. And so now we'll listen to what he presented in the middle of this video.
There is no genealogical record whatsoever that Yeshua is related to King David. How many of you are already aware of this problem? Raise your hand. Okay? A number of people are aware of this problem. If he's not the son of David, he can't be the Messiah. Then why is it that I believe that he's Messiah? Furthermore, the 2 Greek genealogical records of Yeshua through his stepfather don't even agree with each other. Let's look at them. Matthew, we see Yeshua, his mother was married to a man named who? Joseph, according to what it says in Matthew. But Joseph's father was Jacob, whose fathers Mathat, Eleazar, Eliud, Akim, Zadok. But in Luke, we have Yeshua. His supposed father was Joseph, but his father was Heli. Mathat, Levi, Melchi, Yana, and Joseph. They don't agree with each other, do they? You get past the first generation, and it all falls apart. Does anyone see that there's something missing? There are supposed to be 14 measures here. There are only 13, and the entire symphony seems to have gone awry. Could it be that we have not understood the original handwriting? Because the Aramaic text of Matthew's gospel, and Nehemiah is going to bring forth some of this because he is fluent in ancient Aramaic and Syriac and Hebrew. And he's going to show you that the Gospel of Matthew that we have was translated from the Greek, but Matthew wrote his gospel in the Hebrew language. It was then translated into Aramaic, and he's going to show you evidence that from the Aramaic it went into the Greek. We're going to take just one step back, and we're going to see what the Aramaic reads. And Jacob, the 11th, Yaakov, the 11th generation, begat Joseph, the 12th generation, who was the father of Miriam. That makes Miriam the 13th generation, of whom was born Yeshua, who is the 14th generation, who is called the Messiah. Now we have 14 generations. Absolutely perfect, not a single beat missing. And now we have the lineage of Yeshua through his only earthly parent, the seed of the woman, who goes right straight back through the kingly line of David, then all the way back to Abraham. Absolute perfection. But according to the King James, it immediately, the first chapter of Matthew falls apart. There is no lineage of Yeshua through King David, and he is unqualified to be the Messiah. That's scary when we can't even get past the first book of Matthew. And I know some people say, if the King James was good enough for Moses, it's good enough for me. Well, let's take a look at this. From the carrying away into Babylon under the Messiah are, in fact, when it all...
Okay, and next we need to look at his book that's still online and at his webpage. So when you type in the words Aramaic text, Michael Rood, genealogy of Jesus, this would come up. And this did even come up when I was asking about the retraction. And this comes up where there is no retraction. So let's take a... Now we're looking at his book. This is on page 44. And he has the genealogy of Yeshua. And he's looking at Matthew 1, 1 to 17. That's going to cover verse 16, the verse at issue. This is a scroll of the genealogy, and we're supposed to understand this is coming through some sort of Aramaic text. It's not clear exactly at the moment. We're going to see what he finds. And now he has Yaakov begat Joseph. That's the father. Jacob is Yaakov begat Joseph. That's what we know as Joseph, the father of Jesus or stepfather. But now we're going to find out, no, that this allegedly is in AHM. I think that's Aramaic. That's what he's trying to say. Father of Miriam, of whom was born Yeshua. So instead of husband of Miriam, of whom was born Yeshua. So she allegedly is in the lineage of Joseph. Okay, so let's take a look here. He says the footnote tells you it's Aramaic. He's reading it to be father. And I'm just going to tell you ahead of time, he's going to admit that this was not correct. It was his own personal interpretation of what it was, and not a translation. That's the shocking truth. And then he's going to actually say here, the Peshitta Aramaic text of Matthew 1:16 was translated from a latter Greek text. So this isn't even the original. This is a translation from Greek to Aramaic. So, and that's what I understood too. The Peshitta, for all its value, it might be useful to know how those terms would have been translated from Greek to Aramaic at that time, but they're not really more authentic than the Greek. You have to go underneath the Greek and find that original Hebrew. But anyway, neither here nor there. So it was translated from a later Greek text. It indicates that Miriam, Gevra, mighty man, was named Joseph, and Matthew 1 verse 19 specifies that Miriam, Bala, husband, was also named Joseph. Now he's going to mention this in his reasoning. I mean, he's going to give it a little defense of himself, which is there were two different words. So he construed from the fact that Bala, or husband, was used, the second reference, that the word mighty man, what he translated as mighty man, meant that difference meant that he was something else. He would therefore be her father. And Nehemiah Gordon ridicules that. You would never infer that just from the fact that you're using two different words. And so that's how he himself, Rood, agrees he's been unraveled by a scholar, well qualified, and a friend and an ally who he pays a lot of money to, who doesn't want to disrupt things, and kept his mouth shut till he could speak up about it. And the both of them agreed to come forward and explain this. So anyway, you can just see what he had a reason for it. But that doesn't mean you stick with it. You now need to retract this and say it doesn't really mean mighty man alone, or even if maybe it means that still, but you have to say it also means husband. He didn't give you that option, right? He said it indicates Miriam's Gevra, or mighty man, was Joseph. He doesn't say mighty man or husband. He just tells you one thing. But if you listen to Nehemiah Gordon, it's just husband. Even the first time, even Gevra means husband, and Bala is just another way of saying the same thing. That's what I infer from what Nehemiah Gordon is saying. I don't know Aramaic, but he does. So if that's what he's saying, I'm gonna assume that's true, and that's why this needs to be rewritten, republished with the correct information, with Nehemiah Gordon's help, or maybe have Nehemiah Gordon write a separate article critiquing this or something, and put it on the webpage and link it here. Do something, because people will repeat this, Michael, and people will repeat error. And you yourself agree it was a mistake. It was an overzealous interpretation, willing to find more medieval, excuse me, rather than a medieval text. You were hoping it would be a very ancient text. It would be an ancient text, but we cannot push things too far, or otherwise we're going to create a problem. But I just want to underscore one thing that is correct here is he says that if we don't have the word father here, so he's trying to persuade us to this end conclusion, because without this change, it's fatal to Christianity. Okay, and he's correct. It's fatal unless there's some explanation, and the one he thought he found doesn't exist. So now we have to go find out what's the best explanation, and I'm going to get to that in a second here. But listen to what he says here. The English translators then chose to translate the singular Greek word aner as husband, and he's not actually saying aner doesn't mean husband. Uh, but anyway, he says this created a fatal mathematical error in the Greek and English text. What does he mean? Because it left only 13 generations, quote, from the carrying away into Babylon until Messiah. So if you count the generations, so this is the other thing, is even if Joseph had a child, Jesus would still only be the 13th generation. See? Okay, so here you can look at my chart that I did. I just took, I think it was the King James or it was the NIV, whichever, and put in the numbers. So you look at verse 12. So this is after they were brought to Babylon. You start counting how many generations until Christ. And according to Matthew 1, verse 17, it's going to be 14 generations. And there's a mathematical mistake here. No matter how you cut this, so let me just show you, is the way it reads now is the 12th generation is Jacob begot Joseph. You don't count the parent, by the way, in counting generations. You count the child. There's one generation. Jacob begat Joseph is one generation. Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, and that gives you the next generation is if it says and then of whom was born Jesus. So Jesus is what? The 13th generation. Therefore, you don't have 14 generations as it says you're supposed to have in Matthew 1, verse 17. So I just want to say that unless there's another generation missing, there's a generation missing is very tempting to believe. And that's what Mr. Rood wanted to believe, but it turned out not to be true, at least in the Aramaic text he was looking at. And therefore, that's not the solution to this problem. Okay. Now I'm just going to leave it there. All right. And then we'll move on. All right, so now when you go back to Mr. Rood's book, he's telling you why he thinks that mathematical issue is very important, because now just changing that one word from husband to father, now you get Miriam becomes the 13th generation, and when she gives birth, that's the 14th generation. So it solves that numerical problem, and at the same time, he believes it creates a matrilineal line that could be of the line of David. Now that's not going to be true when we study. You just have to read Numbers 1, verse 1. I'll just give you a quick 1 and 2. Yahweh says, and it says, count by the houses of the fathers. I mean, it's Yahweh speaking. It's unequivocal. And the scholars, if you read all the commentary on that, they all say it has to do. That's how come the Jews were keeping genealogical records by the fathers, because it was mandated by Yahweh in Numbers 1, verse 1 and 2. All right. Anyway, but maybe we'll get to it in this video or another video. And his reasoning or defense is that Miriam was supposed to be the husband of Joseph. Okay. And he says this is clearly stated in detail in Luke. So he's saying, I can't rely upon Luke because there's no ambiguity there. It's just simply it goes from Joseph to his wife, Miriam. So there's no ambiguity. That's kind of important. So that closes off Luke from this argument. And then he goes through all of this and he says, now you have Miriam's father is Joseph, and that changes everything. And now you can solve all the numerical problems. Okay, so now here comes very problematical statements by Mr. Rood. There is only one ancient biblical source that maintains the correct lineage of Yeshua through his mother to King David. It is not ancient. That is the ancient Hebrew Matthew. I'm sorry, 1300s is not ancient. That is relatively recent medieval history. You don't believe how close we are to 1300. That's 700 years ago. That's not ancient history. Ancient history is way back in the Egyptian pyramids, maybe 100 BC to about 300, 400 BC. That's ancient history. This is recent medieval history. It's not the same thing. And then he says has been preserved in Jewish archives. As of Yom Kippur 2012, 28 separate manuscripts of the ancient original language Hebrew Matthew. Unbelievable claim. Unbelievable. Even Professor Howard doesn't say this about the Shem Tab. Karaite scholar Nehemiah Gordon. Okay, so it's not ancient. It's not the original Hebrew. Okay, that is affirming to people that every word on that page is the original Hebrew. That is false. It has some indication that some of the Hebrew could be original, particularly when we compare it to the Greek. For example, that whole thing about the locusts that were eaten by uh, John the Baptist. This was mentioned by Epiphanius in the 380s that, hey, the Hebrew Matthew in Caesarea says says that he ate manna and honey cakes, and he got it wrong. The Hebrew Matthew must be a mistake. It must be a fraud because we know it is locusts. Well, it turned out the laugh is on Epiphanius. The joke is on him because the word, when you translate honey cakes into Greek, and look at the Septuagint, it translates to a word that is honey cake in Greek, but you move one letter, I think it's arba to erba, and you go from honey cake to, guess what word? Locusts. So it's a clear translation error of what was originally there. So when we look at the Hebrew Matthew here, we see it says manna in the Hebrew Matthew that Professor Howard has, and we know that particular word is extremely ancient, so ancient that it was before 390 AD when Epiphanius is trying to ridicule and he was calling the Ebionites, who were the custodians of this, heretics, and he literally called them heretics for claiming that John the Baptist ate manna when the laugh is on him. You see what? So this is the kind of thing that was the original word. How do you know any of the other words are the original words, particularly when the purpose of the Shem Tov Hebrew Matthew is to be current on what is the latest Bible that the Gentiles are using? So you got to go to the Latin, and Mr. Professor Howard makes this point. Anytime there are changes in the Latin Matthew, they are trying to update and put that into their version so that it is a reflection of not only the original, but an overlay, a very heavy overlay, he says, of the Latin Vulgate. So you cannot just say, hey, everything on the page, even though it's in Hebrew lettering, is because that's how it read originally. No, these are Talmudic and Hebrew scholars in the 1200s and the 1300s being forced by overbearing Spanish and French kings. We want you to put on a defense of Judaism so we can ridicule you and make fun of you. That's really what it was. And if we don't like what you're saying, we're going to execute you for heresy if you attack Christianity too hard. And if you say anything we don't like, we're going to exile you. And they did that to Nachmanides. They expelled him for life because he said things that they felt were heresy. And yet they mandated he speak freely to the king. And the king didn't like what was going on. The Pope mandated that, king, I'm sorry, king of whatever, Aragon, I think it was, you've got to expel this guy for his entire life. Destroyed this man's life just defending his faith, and he did it. And the king even thought he did a good job in what he called was an unjust cause. So this is not the environment that would produce your closest version of the Hebrew manuscript. You know what's the closest version? It's the version you can recreate from all the quotes by Jerome in the 300s, by the other There's 22 quotes by Jerome. There's many other quotes by Epiphanius, and then there's several quotes by Irenaeus. And actually now we can conclude that Justin, who wrote in he died in 164, he has many, many quotes of what he calls the Memoirs of the Apostles. And everybody always says, we're not sure if he means the Hebrew Matthew. So it's never been put in that category. But I recently found when a scholar, Malachi, he wrote this in the 1800s. He said, inside of the Hebrew Matthew that was quoted by Epiphanius, it actually said, he noted that sometimes there's references that the apostles are speaking in Hebrew Matthew as a group, and then other times Matthew will speak of himself in first person and sometimes in third person. So so he was saying it's not that arbitrary that Justin would refer to the Hebrew Matthew as the memoirs of the apostles, because a lot of its context in the early part, in fact, apparently for the very first few chapters, it says the apostles are speaking, and then later it'll get more into Matthew speaking directly to the audience, and then he'll even refer to himself in third person. So anyway, this is just beyond belief that anyone can make these statements, and that's why you need Nehemiah Gordon to say these things, not Mr. Rood. And I think he's a great guy, has the right heart, but you cannot overstretch and exaggerate things, and that's what this to me is not a clear admission that I was wrong. This is trying to say that what has been found by Nehemiah Gordon from the 1300s is the same equivalent strength as what I found or thought I had found in the 400 manuscripts. No, no, they are not. They're 900 years apart. And the purpose and function of the Shem Tov Matthew is completely to try to keep the most current version effectively available, so that when they're debating, they don't lose by the fact they're not current with the latest Vulgate Matthew. And it kept evolving. That's a fact of life. Sometimes Latin even just changes in language, so they had to keep updating it. And then the Jews had to go back and translate that Latin into Hebrew so that they could read it as a group and could be a community who could then understand what they're going to have to debate. When you're in a debate, you must have what the other guy has in his hand. You can't go say, you know what, I'm going to pull out of this box here. I found this manuscript from 1,000 years ago, and I'm going to use this on you. No, it's just, we're just lucky that sometimes when you see things that aren't in the Latin Vulgate and it's only here in the Hebrew Matthew, then you go, well, maybe that could be older. But anyway, and then the other thing is he's going to tell you that there are how many manuscripts? Two texts. 2 out of how many? 28 manuscripts that have this? 2 out of 28. I mean, it could simply be I mean, this is handwritten stuff. Could be just simply written wrong. Maybe the person got confused. I mean, or what I think is more likely is these are their little cheat sheets that they cannot deny the virgin birth. If they deny the virgin birth, they're going to be boiled in oil. There's just no, they're going to be killed, executed. Because it says the king said, you cannot commit heresy, but we will let you defend your faith. Just don't, basically, you cannot attack our faith. You can't go after the Trinity. You can't go after the virgin birth. You can't go after these things. You can't attack us there. But what you have to defend your faith. So these Jews were trying to do that, and but sometimes the issues were moved over, the goalposts were moved around. So it's like, they're trying to get the Jews to admit that Christianity is true, so they have to kind of bring some of the New Testament into the picture, and that's where the Jewish people were most at risk of being in violation of the anti-heresy capital crime that could occur, and was used against them 100 years before Shem Tov. So he's clearly trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. Anyway, so let's look further here in what he says. In 2 of the oldest manuscripts of the ancient Hebrew Matthew, false, is the medieval Hebrew Matthew, copied into the appendix of the Shem Tov IBN Shabrutz Evan Bokan. We have the accurate lineage of Yeshua. No, we don't. Not necessarily. It's a lineage. To say it's accurate, you need specialists to say, hey, we've looked at all the prior versions of this and all the names are still the same as they always were. Because I don't think Jaconi is accurate. Okay. I think that was fraudulently put in there by an early, I think by Marcion. That's my theory. Okay, that shows his direct ancestral path to the throne of David, Yosef Avi Miriam, Joseph, the father of Miriam, of whom was born Yeshua. So now he's telling you something that he was saying. So you know what? I'm a little concerned here. He is writing this after he's admitted on videotape that he was wrong to ever say father. And now it seems to me he's telling you the same thing he told us before. So is this a retraction? Wait till you see the video. All he can say is what he said in the video is the second time father appeared, he called it husband, but he really on video, we're going to see the video is Nehemiah Gordon says no, there's no way. It's you could not imagine that Aramaic word meaning anything but husband. So I'm next going to pull up a slip of Nehemiah Gordon being emphatic that what he was telling at the time that Mr. Rood is making all these claims, 41 different lectures, that the word Gevra meant that Joseph was the father of Miriam, that he could not accept that. That is not what the Aramaic word meant there. And so he was just emphatic, no, no, no. So listen to what he said, and this is obviously what he's telling Mr. Rood, and that's not landing initially, but eventually it did.
And my reason was that if I just read the Aramaic and didn't know about Luke, I would never in a million years think that Guvra or Gever means the father. It clearly would mean the husband, certainly in a Jewish context. It's Ish, which is man, which is, when does Ish mean father? It seems very convoluted. You're bringing information into the story in order to make it mean father.
Okay, I'm going to stop reviewing his footnotes and whatever, because he seems to not be speaking in those footnotes. Despite being completely aware of what he's going to admit in this video, or did admit in this video that's on Facebook. So let's watch this video on Facebook and tell me how you can reconcile what he's saying here with what's still in his book after he's aware of what Nehemiah Gordon has said.
With Joseph and the relationship with Miriam. Can you set that up real quick?
Okay, very, very quickly. Nehemiah was on the road with me as we were doing the Raiders of the Lost book. And so I was using the Aramaic text because I saw a problem here. It says there are 14 generations from David to the carrying away to Babylon, unto Messiah. When you count them, there are only 13. And you can read it in English. There are only 13 generations. We've got a problem right there. And so the Aramaic, I was using the Aramaic text, and I was using an interpretation. Nehemiah would say it wasn't really a translation. I was really squeezing this thing to say that Joseph, his father was the son, he was the son of Yaakov, and this Joseph was the father of Miriam. And so I'll let Nehemiah pick it up from there, because that is then when you have Joseph, the son of Yaakov, the father of Miriam, instead of the husband of Miriam, now you have 14. But yet in the later verses, it says that Joseph, her husband. In Aramaic, that's a different word. And so that was my take on it. That is how I was explaining this. And then Nehemiah has listened to me for 45 cities do this.
So clearly, to his credit, Mr. Rood is admitting that he was told he admits that in the end, what he was doing is giving an interpretation of the first word there, the Gevra word, that would mean father of Miriam instead of husband, because the second word, his defense was, well, the second word is clearly husband, and he did not think that the first word would necessarily mean the same thing. So he had an interpretation, and then he self-effacingly and properly says, Nehemiah would say, Michael, it's not a translation. trying to convince him it's only an interpretation, so that he had done something incorrectly, and he's taking his medicine. And we'll see again. I want to repeat to you what Nehemiah Gordon says, addressing specifically what he was hearing on 41 different tours was incorrect as to the words on the page in Aramaic. That's where his dispute was. Now, we're not talking about the Shem Tov from almost from the 1300s, and the Aramaic would have been from the 300s. So we're talking about 1,000 year later documents is not what Nehemiah Gordon is talking about. So let's listen to him one more time.
This is something that Christians have struggled with. Now, I heard you teach in 42 different times that the Aramaic has guvra, which normally means husband, but here maybe it means father. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry, I remain totally unconvinced from the Aramaic. And my reason was that if I just read the Aramaic and didn't know about Luke, I would never in a million years think that guvra or gever means the father. It clearly would mean the husband, certainly in a Jewish context. It's ish, which is man, which is, when does ish mean father? It seems very convoluted. You're bringing information into the story in order to make it mean father.
Okay, so despite that scholarly statement, we're reading here, he's saying Matthew 1:16, father, not husband, because he's saying the Peshitta Aramaic text of Matthew 1, verse 16, which is translated from a later Greek text. So it's not the original Matthew, it's actually from the Greek, not. So the Greek is a translation from the Hebrew Matthew. So the Aramaic text is a derivative of a Greek text, not an Aramaic text, at least not directly. Excuse me, not a Hebrew text. So it's only a translation, Aramaic translation of a Greek text. So there's you're already got one layer of obscurity, right? And it's not what you need to actually have. And it says indicates that Miriam Gevra, and he talks about that. He was talking about this word. He would never imagine this word would mean anything but husband. The Gevra named Yosef, and he's talking about an Aramaic term. So I don't know Aramaic, but Nehemiah Gordon does, and he's saying this is just unfathomable to him. And Matthew 1, verse 19 specifies that Miriam's Bala husband was also named Joseph. He doesn't dispute that, but it doesn't change the fact that Gevra would not mean anything but husband.
And my reason was that if I just read the Aramaic and didn't know about Luke, I would never in a million years think that guvra or gever means the father. It clearly would mean the husband, certainly in a Jewish context. It's ish, which is man, which is, when does ish mean father? It seems very convoluted. You're bringing information into the story in order to make it mean father.
All right. So how can this exist in a text with that interchange going on directly to each other's faces? And he's not willing and hasn't changed this. This is ridiculous. This has just got to be changed, Mr. Rood. I'm sorry. I love you. You're a wonderful guy. You have so many great lessons, but this is a discredit to you if you don't fix this. And it will not help the Bible to have this confusion and misunderstanding of what you said. There is no ancient text that says that Mary was the daughter of Joseph, the person she marries. She's marrying, which is why another crazy thing. She's marrying this person. In context, we are led to understand she is marrying Joseph, and yet you are saying she's his daughter. Come on. Even how can Joseph be a stepfather of the child of his daughter? I mean, right? Jesus would be the child of Mary, and Joseph would be, let's say he then adopted Jesus of his own daughter. He's adopting his daughter's son. I mean, come on. It just has all kinds of perverse implications. I mean, this is just, it's anyway, it's not biblical and it's not what the words mean. And Nehemiah Gordon said so. Please remove this paragraph. Please delete this. Please get rid of this whole idea. It's going to pollute things because you haven't cleaned it up even yet, even despite your own admissions that this was an interpretation, not a translation. And in all of your justifications that, without this, Jesus doesn't have a Davidic ministry lineage, yes, it's still a problem, but you don't come up with false solutions to fix the problem. You must come up with the truth, and the truth is somewhere else, and it has to be in manuscripts, and that's why the Agnes Lewis's discovery of the Syriac Sinaiticus that said Joseph begat Jesus, which matched Justin's 2 times quoting it, matched Aquila quoting it in the early church. We're talking Justin is in the 150, 160. He dies 164. I mean, it says Joseph begat Jesus in all these early texts from the uh, 2nd century, meaning in the hundreds. So this is earlier than anything else, earlier than this Aramaic, earlier than this Greek translation. And all we need to do, we have a detective story, can we explain why did it get corrupted? And I think the story can be easily explained by Marcion, because our scripture now reads exactly like Marcion would have wished the Luke passages read, that you would have a virgin birth, which would completely comport with Marcion theology that Jesus was God from birth, but he isn't Messiah. So that may sound weird to you, but by putting Jaconi in there, he blocked Jesus from being Messiah. And so that was like a little bomb that he and Theodotion could make up. And so it would look like a whatever. And if you have a virgin birth, you don't have a genealogy anyway. So he beat the idea that Jesus was begotten of Joseph by creating a virgin birth. So that negates the lineage. But even if you imagine it was a lineage, by putting in Jaconia, Jesus was defeated both ways. So he, Marcion, didn't believe Jesus was Messiah, just to be clear here. So this is one of those things where everything lines up. I think ultimately I'm going to make a case that Marcion is clearly changing the text to match his theology, which was foreign to the Bible, but he was willing to take us in this bizarre new route where Paul was the only apostle. That was his main doctrine. And there was a good God, that's the Father, but there's the good Jesus of Paul, and that God, and that's where all the good people go. And this God doesn't judge anyone for any sin at all. He accepts everybody, literally everybody. It doesn't matter what you do. God forgives everything, every sin you do. And you don't even have to repent. You don't have to change anything. It was just a very interesting religion that anyone create a religion like this. So anyway, we'll talk about Marcion another time, but this has to be changed, Mr. Rood. I love you. You're a wonderful guy. You do all kinds of great stuff. I watch all your videos, and you had the best of intentions here to fix a big hole. All right, I'll just pause it there and say, Mr. Rood, we need to have this reversed and to be clarified, if you don't mind, so that we can clear away the error of thinking this is the solution. A 13th century document, 2 variants out of 25, 28 different Shem Tov manuscripts from the 1300s is not adequate to build a case that we could ever argue credibly to people. We can argue that Mary is the lineage, and let me just throw quickly in here, and I know that this is long, but there is no argument for a matrilineal heritage to satisfy the requirement of 2 Samuel 7. And let me just show you that real quick. And Mr. Rood, I'm going to show you this real quick. If I am wrong at all, ask Nehemiah Gordon to verify whether what I'm telling you is true or not. So what you're saying, or we're saying, is that the Shem Tov of 1200s, 1300 says Jacob begat Joseph, the father of Miriam. Okay, and you said that's in 2 manuscripts. So that's what Nehemiah is saying. He's not saying that's what you should rely upon. He's saying, but your only alternative is you're subject to the Greek text, and that's not the only alternative. But Tobias Singer points out, no, that's not true. January 19th, 2021 video, Numbers 118, it's measured by their father's houses. You can verify this by looking at the actual Bible Hub. You'll see it's by their fathers. The NIV tries to change it to by their clans and families. That's not correct. In the Hebrew, it is by their fathers' houses. And then the JPS has the same thing. Again, this is what we want to reach to our Jewish brothers and sisters, right? We don't want to give them something they can't credibly believe, that this goes through Mary, right? So we have to follow the law. We can't come up with lawless solutions here. Ezra 259, they could not show their father's house and their seed, whether they were of David. So if you don't have your father's house, you can't show you're the seed of Israel in that example. from Ezra 2:5-59, repeated again in Nehemiah 7 verse 61. All right, so it must be by their house in Nehemiah 7 verse 61. They could not show their father's house nor their seed whether they were of Israel. So that's telling you it's determined by the father's house, not by someone else's house. And then Kyle and DeLeach confirmed that basically they were using a genealogical register that is by the father's house. And if you're not listed there in that lineage, you're not of that tribe. And then I just want to show what a modern rabbi will say, and I'm going to show you the conclusive one at the end, is Numbers 1 verses 1-2. He says, and this is the differentiation that is what I would call a law and oral law argument. So tribal is paternal, that's the law, the written law, and oral law, Jewish lineage is maternal. And so what he says, Rabbi Noah Weinberg, at his webpage, which is, let me show you here, it's the bottom, aish.com, aish. It's also true that the tribal affiliation follows the father's side. Again, see here, and he gives a link, explains all that, but it is distinct from Jewishness itself, which follows the mother. So apparently, whether you are of the people, of the Jewish people, that is done by the maternal lineage. And I don't understand why they would think that, but regardless, the law is on the left side of this column. The oral law is on the right side of the column. It might be arguable that Jesus is a Jew, and so you can settle it by Mary's lineage, but you could never solve that Jesus of the house of David if you don't have a male line in his as a progenitor, as his father. And so I think that ends that. And then he explains why a mother must be Jewish in order to pass that you're Jewish. But he says very clearly, in another sense, however, the father does pass on lineage in terms of which tribe the child belongs to. This determines whether the child is a Cohen, a Levite, or Israel. See Numbers 1, verses 20-46, which explicitly categorizes the Jewish people by their father's house. Numbers 1, 20-26. And I just want to show, I think this is the end of the argument. Numbers 1, verses 1-2, and the Lord Yahweh said, take you the sum of all the congregations of the children of Israel after their families by the house of their fathers with the number of their names, every male by their polls, etc., etc. And the commentaries say what this means, and they say this is the famous lineage command, basically, to use the fathers of the houses to determine lineage for tribal reasons. And so the public commentary says, after their families, this was to be sure a registration as well as a census. No doubt the lists and pedigrees collected at this time laid the foundation of that exact and careful genealogical lore which played so important a part both in the religious and the secular history of the Jews down to the final dispersion. I think that means the Babylonian captivity. Every Jew had not only his national, but also, and often even more, his tribal and family associations and sympathies. So we can't pretend we don't know that Mary doesn't qualify. And I beg you to ask Nehemiah Gordon if he can back you up. And I think he would again say, I can't back you up. That's not how it works. If it's Mary, he's just telling you what you want to hear, which is that, Mary is mentioned in two little manuscripts of the Shem Tov, but he's not confirming that you can do what you want to do. And that's the ultimate thing. So let's not get caught up in that solution. There is a better solution. Go with Agnes Lewis's discovery of this. It's called the Syriac Sinaiticus. She has two books. She was a famous person, famous Aramaic, Hebrew scholar, knew a lot of other Middle Eastern languages, and she found this in the late 1800s, and she did a book in 1892 and 1896, I believe it was, and she translated this. She had top experts look at it. She determined the original underlying text that was being overwritten by people handwriting in the 700s was from the first century, not first century, but at the 100s. So she has an underlying text due to orthography and whatever that's even older than the Curitan manuscript. Her language, the language in her manuscript is Syriac, and it's of the four Gospels. And that's where she's telling you it says Joseph begat Jesus in the book of Matthew. And that has to be where we rest our case. And we have Paul saying Jesus of the seed of David. We have Justin, 2 letters of Justin. That's in the 100s. He dies 164. They both say Jesus was of the seed of David. Excuse me. It actually quotes the gospel genealogy. It says Joseph begat Jesus twice. It has it there. It's once in a book called Aquila. So it's 3 such documents. And even in the book of Acts, in Acts 13, I think it's verse 64, it says that Jesus is of the seed of David. So that was the perception of Luke, the person who wrote the Gospel of Luke. But even his narrative is clearly a late corruption, and there's many ways to know that. And I'm just going to give you an example. Tertullian used to say in 200s, when Tertullian is writing around 204 AD, he writes a book and he says that Mary and the family show that they don't believe in Jesus. They think he's gone out besides his mind. And this is still in Mark, but it was removed later in Luke. We can't find this passage anymore in Luke, but it's whoever was making the change in Luke did it well after the 200s. It stayed in Mark. It still shows that it says Jesus was the mother and the siblings of Jesus, but he was outside of his mind. And this is his first ministry, and they don't know why he's behaving this way, where he's trying to get attention to himself. They think he's gone crazy. This could not be Mary, the mother, a virgin mother, okay? And it was in Luke. So we know for a fact it was created after approximately late 100s, early 200s, and I believe the good theory will be that will confirm this in due course, is that Marcion and his friend Theodotion, who was a translator from Hebrew to Greek, of the Old Testament, quote unquote Old Testament. Those two added the virgin birth, which completely matches Marcionism, that Jesus was God from birth, and that's it. And that's how they wanted Jesus to be God from birth, but they did not believe he was Messiah. So it's a perfect solution. You put this in our Bible, destroy our Bible, boom. And Marcion had the money to do this. So I think it's a good theory, but more importantly, the documentary records back it all up. Okay, I hope you think about it, and we'll continue to do videos on our channel, and we hope that you will take a look, and we will all move in this direction. This is the direction we can win on, but it takes a little bravery, because nobody wants to say the obvious point is somebody corrupted a key part of our scripture to destroy us, to sabotage us, which even Tavia Singer says it was sabotage. Whoever put this into the Christian scripture sabotaged it. And do you think Matthew did that? No, somebody evil outside of Christianity did this to us. We need to undo the sabotage. We need to undo the wound. So let's work on undoing the wound, remove this whole thing. There's many reasons to get rid of the genealogy. But most of all, if the counts are wrong, the mathematical counts are wrong. It's 13 in the first set. It's 13 in the second set. Even if Jesus were born of Joseph, it's still only 13 sets. You yourself realize that. Everybody else realizes that. So we've got a serious problem. Okay, God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye. Okay, so that ends this episode, and I hope that this is will get to Mr. Rood somehow, and that he'll understand this was meant with love, and for the entire Christian community, that Mr. Rood brought a very important topic to all of our attention. That is, that if we don't find the answer to the virgin birth and solve that, and I'm giving you the alternative that is goes back to the earliest church's records and the earliest proofs. If we don't go back and find that, it's not going to come from something in the 13th century. It's just not a solution. We have to find something that is truly ancient, truly at the beginning, before it gets corrupted. And yes, it's shocking to know that things get corrupted, but you know what? The more I get used to it, the more you just have to get used to it. We had people who wanted to corrupt and destroy the message of Jesus Christ. Why is that so surprising? That people, I think it's still going on today. People are still trying to corrupt the message of Jesus. And that's why we get dispensationalism that throws all of Jesus away. I think that's what the challenge of the so-called apostle, the 13th apostle, that was why he was there to challenge us. So there's so many attacks on Christianity, But if we're weak and we don't try to find the reliable evidence that a neutral third party would say that's good enough for me to say, hey, Jesus's father was Joseph, and that you have a perfect proof of Marcion being a person who was rich, whose friend Theodotion was a famous translator from from Hebrew to Latin. He's even in the Hexapla of Oregon. He's one of the Jewish translators from Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament Bible, to the Greek. I mean, he's a Marcionite. Marcionite. Theodotion lives in the same city as Marcion of Sinope. They live both in Sinope. What's the chances of that coincidence didn't produce the fruit we're looking at in a Bible that completely matches Marcionite's idea that Jesus just is from heaven, directly born by God, just appears as a human being, isn't really a human being, is divine from his first existence, and the virgin birth completely comports with that. And what about the bomb, the Jaconia bomb inside of our genealogy, and exactly matches his belief that Jesus isn't the Messiah? Follow that logic. He doesn't believe Jesus is the Christ. He So putting in Jaconia into the narrative is the perfect way to bomb that. So let those Christians, those people who follow the first dispensation of Jesus. This is how the Marcionites thought, by the way. That first dispensation is not the right one. Paul has the right one, and he met the real Jesus. But this other Jesus, he's going to go into the trash bin of history. That's what Marcion wanted. So he puts Jaconia in there, and he bombs the Jesus of the Gospels. He wants only the Jesus of Paul, which is this ascended Jesus who returns to heaven, and he is the one Paul is communicating with, and brings us a whole different gospel than the Jesus who was wed to the Yahweh version of God, that mean and evil God, according to Marcion. And I don't believe that's right. God has justice. That's why he has some rules. Marcion has no rules. All right, so it's got to be this is the solution. We just have to keep working on it. We'll find it, and we'll make it so that third parties who are neutral could even agree the evidence is substantial enough to say yes, you're right. So if they want to test Christianity, we can pass the test. Right now, we cannot pass the test with 13th century 1300s manuscripts from the 1300s, which are produced by groups that are dueling, where if you stated the virgin birth was true in those duels, verbal duels, the Jewish people who are saying that would be killed. So having a manuscript that says Mary was the daughter of Joseph, her husband, which is sick, perverse, by the way. I mean, that's just the sense of humor of a Marcionite, if you ask me, is if we had that kind of birth through a woman, it would be completely consistent with Marcionism, and there's no messiahship of that person, and that's perfect for them. They love that. So we can't fall into the Marcionite trap, is what I'm saying. And I think it's been very cleverly laid, but it's now we're going to peel it back, and you're going to say, well, Doug, how are you going to prove it conclusively? The proof is out there. It's already out there. And what was it? Marcionite's own gospel was well known, meaning he produced a gospel that did not have any genealogy. And as I showed you in the first quote from Miss Lou, I'll show it up here again, is that means there was, because he would believe that Jesus had no birth from a human parent. He was born from above. That's Marcionite's doctrine. So but the virgin birth did something else. It blocked Jesus from being Messiah by putting in the fact that he was his Jaconia was his heir. And then the Luke account seems to be someone who's aware of the Jaconia account destroying the messiahship of Jesus, tries to create a second account, much more elaborate, so that would convince people. And that's the account where you have to say someone for a pious purpose committed a fraud, thinking I can't change now the Hebrew Matthew, but I can surely change Luke's and save Jesus. That's what I think the Lucan account is. Somebody who was trying to save Jesus. And you have to know that the Luke account was stored away. It was a legal document used in a trial, and that's why it only comes out into the open in the one 40s period, in the very time period that somebody wants to combat this, let's call it a phony Marcionite genealogy that's put out in Matthew. So now somebody says, hey, you know what? The way to combat that is to not just say that it's false. Let's create a new narrative. The virgin birth account sounds beautiful. Let's go with that. But we have to get Jaconi out of the line, and we're going to write this other account so people will still have a way of believing in Jesus, but they have to believe he came from a virgin. And these are people who don't know the Jewish law about patrilinealism. Okay, so they're Gentiles. They're trying to save Christianity. I think that's the Lucan version, my own opinion. But I think these are things we will flesh it all out and hopefully present a cogent case for it. But again, 13th century manuscripts that are used in a duel to the death is not going to work. So let's give that up. And anyway, that's my prayer about this. And I pray we all move in a new, better direction where we can sustain the argument of Jesus being the Christ, being the Messiah. What is more important than this issue? I don't know. Even the issue of nothing, frankly, is more important than this issue to resolve. Not for us. We those who love Jesus. It's like, you know what? We know there's an explanation somewhere. But how in the future are we going to convince anybody? We have to have a plausible correction here. And I suggest we eventually make it right in the Bible. Present the Bible the way it read. Joseph begat Jesus, and leave it there. Don't go and just take all the virgin birth stuff out and say, this is what we've concluded, just like we did this with the where Jesus is supposed to have said to the woman, I've forgiven your sins, and she was caught in adultery. And we say, you know what, these 8 verses were not in the original manuscript, and you might put them there in brackets to say for information, or put a footnote or something, but take them all out and put a footnote and say, take a look at our appendix. We have an explanation of how the corruption took place. Here's the proof that the oldest documents prove it was Joseph begat Jesus, and then pray to God that the evidence will be sustainable over the long haul. From this time forward, we will have created a record that the future generations can trust the Christianity that is from the true Jesus Christ and will be sustainable. But if we don't, at this time and age, fix this is going to go down as the biggest blunder of Christians. It's our generation that has to fix this. And I'm sorry, it's up to us. If we don't fix it, it's going to be lost. And if we kick the ball over to Mr. Rood's solution, we're doomed. And that's all I have to say. All right. And he's given up on it himself. I mean, he just has to be more clear about it. So we just need to know that he gave up on it. And he's admitting it's only a 13th century proof. That doesn't work, ladies and gentlemen. So let's get our heads together. Let's pray about it. Let's ask God for wisdom and do the right thing. Get this to a place where it's based on documents that are verifiable, that were truly, truly ancient. All right. God bless. Take care, everyone. Ciao. Bye.